There's been a lot of noise lately about how it's supposedly immoral to encourage Gazans to immigrate to other countries, as President Trump just suggested should be done. But let's break this down honestly and with moral clarity. Let's first deal with the truth about Gaza's population. So first of all, let's state the basic fact that nobody wants to say out loud. The entire population of Gaza was involved in or celebrated the horrific invasion, massacre, mass raping, and kidnapping of innocent Jews on October 7th, 2023. Even those who did not actively participate in the massacre were cheering in the streets as our hostages were dragged, both alive and dead, through Gaza. There are no innocent civilians in Gaza. Now here's the second truth. They launched a war against us, and now their homes and communities are destroyed. That is the price of launching a war. If they cared about their homes or their lives, maybe they shouldn't have actively participated and celebrated the slaughter of over 1,200 Jews on October 7th, 2023. Now let's deal with the myth of forced expulsion. Let's be clear. Nobody is forcing them to leave. Encouraging immigration is not ethnic cleansing. It's not forced expulsion. It's giving people a choice they never had under Hamas rule. And now they don't even have homes to return to. So for decades, Gazans have been trapped by their own terrorist leadership in Gaza, used as human shields, raised to glorify death by their mothers, and living in a constant cycle of war and destruction. And when given the chance, yeah, many want to leave. A recent poll from a Ramallah-based Palestinian Arab Research Center found that over 50% of Gazans today want to leave Gaza. That means a majority of people in Gaza are not only open to immigration, they are actively looking for a way to immigrate and leave Gaza. But guess what? They can't leave. The world doesn't let them to leave. Why? Because Egypt illegally is keeping its border closed even though they're going against international law. International asylum law requires them to allow Gazans to flee a war zone. Have you heard any pressure from the world pressuring Egypt to open its border according to international law? So let's ask, what is truly immoral? Is it immoral to help them leave behind war, terror, and destruction to start new lives elsewhere? Or is it immoral to force them to stay in a war zone under a genocidal terror regime, just so they can be used as political pawns and human shields in a war against Islam, in a war against Israel? And why the silence by the whole world, as Egypt has refused to open its border to allow those who want to leave to do so? And in so doing, Egypt goes against international asylum law. Why the silence of the world? For 15 months, the Biden administration, nope, they have to remain in Gaza, no pressure on Egypt. So why are Gazans different? Think about it. The Biden administration, the United Nations, and all the so-called humanitarians have been screaming since the beginning of the war that Gazans must remain in Gaza. But why? When war broke out in Ukraine, the world celebrated taking in Ukrainian refugees. When Syria collapsed into civil war, the world celebrated welcoming Syrian refugees. When Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, the world celebrated taking in Afghani refugees. So why are Gazans the only people in the world being forced by the world to stay in a war zone and potentially be killed? So the answer, it's simple. Because their suffering is politically useful to Israel's enemies, supported by so many of our allies in the Western world. Keeping them in Gaza ensures a permanent state of conflict with Israel. The world wants them there in Gaza, not to help them, but to keep the war against Israel alive. It's a sad fact to internalize, but why else the hypocrisy? And now let's deal with the Arab world's hypocrisy. And let's be clear, Gaza is not Israel's responsibility. And the Gazans. There are 22 Arab Muslim nations in the Middle East. There are 57 Muslim majority countries in the world, and yet not a single one of them has stepped up to take in their so-called Palestinian brothers and sisters? Don't you think they would want to save them? They're in a war zone. Their lives are in danger. Well, let's look at Qatar, which bankrolled Hamas, refusing to take even a single Gazan refugee. Jordan and Egypt, which claim to support the Palestinian cause, they won't open their borders either. The reality is that everyone wants them to remain right where they are, in Gaza, to remain a terror threat to Israel. No one cares about them. So now let's deal with the real moral position and cut through all the propaganda. First, giving Gazans the option to immigrate is the most humane, most moral, and most practical solution. Next, forcing Gazans to stay in Gaza, where their mothers brainwash the children to be the next generation of Jew murderers, that is the real crime. And then, the silence about Egypt's illegal border closure and their threats to shoot Gazans who cross it, that's what's truly immoral. And yet the humanitarian world says nothing about that. And now here's the real kicker. The same people who today are screaming that encouraging Gazans to leave Gaza is immoral, well, those were the voices who were the biggest supporters of Israel, forcibly expelling 10,000 Jews from their homes in Gaza during the summer of 2005. And they are also the biggest supporters of today Israel expelling Jews from their homes in Judea and Samaria in order to hand it over to the Palestinian Authority. These people basically happily support a Palestinian state that would be 100% Judenrein, free of Jews. What is moral about that? So let's be very clear. The moral inconsistency is those people screaming to the high heavens about Gazans having to immigrate. It is time to call out the hypocrisy of all those so-called humanitarians. And now let's talk about the future, because the Jewish people are not going anywhere. We are back home in our ancestral homeland. And that homeland includes Gaza. For centuries, Gaza was a thriving Jewish community, on and off. The chief rabbi of Gaza in the 16th century, Rabbi Yehuda Najara, wrote the famous Shabbat song, Curry Bone, a song sung by Jews all over the world every Shabbat. Jewish life thrived in Gaza before Arab Muslims migrated there from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab Muslim countries. Don't listen to me. Listen to this Hamas leader from Gaza a number of years ago.
ويستطيع كل فلسطيني في غزة وفي كل فلسطين أن يأتي بجذوره العربية سواء كانت من السعودية أو من اليمن أو من أي نفط. شخصيا نص عائلتي مصرية كلنا، ويمكن بيجي حوالي أكثر من 30 عائلة اسمها المصري. في أساسنا نص فلسطين يا أخواننا مصري ونصها سعودي. إيش من هم الفلسطينيون؟ يكونوا من الإسكندرية، من القاهرة، من دمياط، من الوجه البحري، من أسوان، من الصعيد. نحن مصريون، نحن عرب، نحن مسلمون.
And just as we Jews lived in Gaza before, we will live there again. And here's an article I wrote with the history of the Jewish communities in Gaza. So go check that out. The IDF will remain in Gaza forever. Gaza will be rebuilt as a Jewish area once again, and we will sing the Curry Bone song on the sands of Gaza once more. I promise you that. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. Why? Because that is true justice, and that is what's going to ensure a safe and secure future for us. And the world will be better because of it. So now is the time for clarity. Now is the time for strength. And now is the time to finally end this lie that the Islamo-Nazis of Gaza must remain in Gaza and can't be allowed to immigrate. It's time to let them go. And it's time for Israel to reclaim what is rightfully ours. This is how you explain to friends or family who try to tell you that, oh my God, it's wrong and immoral. Show them this video. Use these talking points. Have a conversation. And know that you standing up for the right of Gazans to leave Gaza, if they want to do so, is totally moral and the right thing to do. That's it for another episode of The Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, in our beautiful, biblical, and indivisible capital, Jerusalem, since King David's time. If you are not yet a subscriber to our Pulse of Israel videos, what are you waiting for? From us, you get the daily, belief-based, politically incorrect, inspiring truth about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world. Go to pulseofisrael.com and click to subscribe. And we are a donor-based organization. We need your support. We're heavily censored and shadow banned all over. In order to reach more people to watch our videos, we need your donations. Big or small, every once in a while, click on the donate button on pulseofisrael.com. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.